Good morning. Welcome to Studio C70, another edition of Philly Youth Vote Takes Over. Studio C70. We're very excited to have Mr. Dan Wassmer, Attorney General candidate in advance of the November 3rd general election next week. And so today he's going to be interviewed by students from Mr. Dan Gavin's class in George Washington High School in Philly. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gavin to introduce his students. But thank you very much, Mr. Wassmer, for being here with us.
Not a problem. It's my pleasure.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. I just have a few slides to share with some information. So we're here today thanks to C70 and Philly Youth Vote conducting this interview. As a reminder for everyone, Election Day is coming up. It's next Tuesday, November 3rd. So make sure you're making a plan to vote. Today, we are interviewing Daniel Wassmer, who is the Libertarian candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General. The interview is conducted online by students in my social science class from George Washington High School. And today's date is October 30th, 2020. So thank you very much, Mr. Wassmer, for being here. Our students worked hard to come up with these questions. Many of our students in the class are registered voters, but everyone is excited to hear from you today. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So our first question, I'm actually going to ask you first question. Can you briefly tell us a little of your background, education, and experience?
Sure. Why don't I start with my education first, because this is a school. So I went to a public high school, and I went through the public school system. I ended up going to a community college on Long Island. I'm originally from Long Island and actually the Poconos also. There's a rather lengthy explanation of that, but I ended up going to Nassau Community College. From there, I ended up going eventually to a college known as Adelphi University on Long Island. I received a Bachelor of Arts, and I have a degree in English literature and philosophy, which basically made me unemployable, at which point I actually managed to get a job at a bank. I got an MBA, which the bank was kind enough to pay for, and I decided to parlay that into a legal degree, and I have a degree from New York Law School. So I have a bachelor's from Adelphi, a master's in finance from Adelphi, and a law school degree from New York Law School. And a little bit more about myself. I don't usually like to talk about myself or anything like that. I'll tell you something that would be interesting for you kids out there. Basically, I am a college professor. Also, I teach Bucks County Community College, but I am also an avid scuba diver, and I'm actually a scuba diver instructor. So I fly airplanes, do a lot of stuff like that, but I enjoy doing that stuff, quite honestly, more than practicing law. So.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question comes from Sharon. Sharon, whenever you're ready.
Hello.
Hi, how are you, Sharon?
I'm doing great. The question is, why are you running to become the Attorney General of Pennsylvania?
Sure, that's a good question. We have basically a two-party system in the United States, and it's very difficult for third parties to actually get what's called ballot access. And believe it or not, even though we don't seem to get a lot of votes, every vote is very important to us because it makes it easier for us to eventually get on the ballot in a number of states. So one of my primary goals for having run for this office was to try to get ballot access for our political party. Our political party, because of COVID, actually had to go and file a lawsuit against the Commonwealth. We had asked for a reduction in the number of signatures that were required to file on petitions in order to get on the ballot. And we were actually denied that in federal court. We were one of two states that had been denied that. and we managed somehow to come up with over 10,000 signatures in a reduced time frame that went from about 7 months to about a month and a half. But one of my primary goals, quite honestly, is to help my political party try to get some type of access, because then we get easier things such as potentially getting matching funds and stuff like this that the other two main parties have had for years. My other concern is more of a practical issue. As an attorney, I've really seen a lot of injustice. I've been practicing for almost 30 years now, and I've seen a ton of injustice in those 30 years of practice that I have. I've done criminal work, civil work. I've handled stuff for the government. I was a county solicitor in Bucks County at one point, and I've seen a lot of abuse politically in the system where money is being spent that shouldn't be spent. I've seen people's taxes adversely affected. I've seen people adversely affected by the justice system. So I'd actually like to see a lot of reforms go on in the justice system. And again, I see a lot of inequities. I see situations where people who are wealthy are treated entirely different under the justice system from people who don't have a lot of wealth or poor people. And there, I see this unfortunately way too frequently. So.
All right, our next question comes from Ozma.
What will you do to make college more affordable and accessible?
To make, I'm sorry, what was that?
What will you do to make college more affordable and accessible?
Cars?
College.
Oh, college.
Yeah.
College. Sorry about that. I didn't hear you. Well, that's actually not really something that is a situation that the Attorney General typically gets involved in. I know from our party's perspective, we have a party platform to do something like that. And it's really something that our presidential and vice presidential candidate have been talking about. And I do have a lot of experience, obviously, as a college professor, and I could give a lot of guidance on this area also. But our platform, our national platform, talks about making college more affordable by basically moving into a training program type of arrangement. And honestly, it's not a bad idea. As I mentioned, I got a free master's degree when I got my original college degree, simply because my employer actually paid for my college education. Not only did they pay for part of my college education, but they actually paid for part of my law school education too. So there's nothing better than free when it comes to college. Again, as somebody who teaches at a community college, I often tell people you get the same basic type of education at a community college that you get at a regular college. And I'm probably a good example of that, because I would honestly say nothing held me back that way as far as getting a very cost-effective college education. And it still managed to get me a fairly decent degree and diploma and a number of positions also. So.
Okay, our next question comes from Zia.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. So my question for you today is, as Attorney General, what will you do to address the racism that is built into the criminal justice system today?
Oh, you know what? This is, again, a really good question. And honestly, I have my two children I have two biracial children. I have, I was married to a Hispanic woman at one point, and there is a whole big degree of racism that goes on. I've seen it personally through dealing with my in-laws, and I've seen the way my own children are treated sometimes, and it just completely blows me away. I usually look at examples of this, and quite candidly, when I see disparities in treatment, and I could go through a prime example of this, I'm going to explain this to you real quickly. Right now, we have medical marijuana dispensaries in Pennsylvania. and those were given out through a licensing process through the government here. So what they're now proposing, I know the governor and the incumbent attorney general, or they're trying to expand that to recreational marijuana. And quite candidly, I am not opposed to that as a libertarian, but my biggest problem is the way that they're trying to do this. And here's an example of a real injustice in my mind. Through the legal dispensaries they have, they're trying to move into something where those legal dispensaries could then allow people to purchase recreational marijuana. And what's going to happen here is essentially a type of enforcement situation where people who are wealthy enough to own a dispensary license will be able to make a lot of money out of it, and people who don't are basically going to be have enforcement situations the same way they do now. Basically, if they sell something on the street, they can end up going to jail for that, and they could spend a number of years in jail. Well, one of the things I want to do as the attorney general is take out this disparity where you're treating one class of people differently from another class of people, and essentially making sure that everybody gets equal protection for a change. And one of the biggest things I want to do is literally sit down with a couple of people, and I actually have a couple of people I've already picked out for this, who would go through all laws to see where they're not being justly applied and make sure that the application of the law is properly applied. The other thing is there's something known as the Ninth Amendment that basically says that if your rights are not affected through if you have rights, they're retained by you if they're not specifically granted to the government. And unfortunately, in this country, we don't ever enforce that constitutional amendment. And what I'd like to see is a lot of laws actually rolled back, because we have a lot of laws that are basically what we call victimless crimes. I would like to see those types of crimes go away so we can actually protect people from violent criminal offenders, more or less. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and it's something that I certainly want to deal with. The last thing, because there's a number of different issues here, and I'm sorry I'm taking so much time on this, but I actually at one point in my life used to be a fraternal order police attorney. That's the union for the police officers. And I know there's a lot of police brutality issues, especially just the other day. I saw something down in Philadelphia. We all know about that, what happened in Philly the other day. And I think to myself, the police are not properly trained and they don't have the proper equipment. The police should be out there protecting people from violent criminals. And in Philadelphia, it actually blows my mind that the police are not equipped with the proper tools for that. And one of those would be, for instance, a taser. So having a taser to disarm somebody, and in my mind, that shooting the other day was completely not justifiable, because that person who had the knife was beyond the wingspan of those police officers. I'm still trying to figure out how you can shoot somebody that many times when each shot being a lethal shot when they're not even close enough to be in harm's way at that point. And the gentleman who was shot was actually closer to some of these other people who were potential victims. All of this stuff rolls into the issue of properly training our police, not having police respond to every incident, having people out there who can respond in a nonviolent way to certain types of issues. And again, like I say, this is a huge issue. I could probably go on for 2 hours about this. So I won't. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the next question comes from Nozima.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
My question for you today is, many people who are unemployed because of the pandemic face eviction from their homes. What will you do to protect Pennsylvanians from eviction? What will you do to help those already evicted?
Well, one of the problems in my mind with the COVID lockdown is the fact that we were all asked to stay in our houses for a long period of time. Now, it'll probably seem strange to you that if when I tell you that as a sole practicing attorney, I was told by the government that I could not practice law for almost 6 months. To me, that's somewhat mind boggling, particularly in light of the fact that I actually applied for a waiver and I said that in my own office, I wouldn't have any customer meetings. I have no staff that's currently on site to work with me. And it would basically be me working in my office, literally this office where I'm broadcasting from. And I was told by the government that I couldn't do that. Well, one of the first things we need to do is make sure that people who are out of work have the ability to actually work. So, in my mind, as a libertarian, the government shouldn't be telling us this, but the government should be providing us proper information so that we, as individuals, can make proper decisions on our own to protect ourselves, our families, and so on. And what I've unfortunately seen going on here is that this whole issue's been entirely politicized. And quite candidly, I'm not sure that's the best approach to this. So the first thing we would need to do is stop basically locking up people or making people, or we are locking up people in their homes who would otherwise be able to go out and work. If we provide people with proper information so they could protect themselves, they would be able to go work and provide for their families, for themselves, and so on. And if they do that in a manner that's safe, I see no problem with that. That in and of itself would help people avoid eviction. I have friends who are currently in the same boat. I mean, they can't work, and as a result, they can't pay their landlords. And honestly, I know not every landlord is somebody who owns a huge apartment building. There are people who have a tenant in their house. So a lot of landlords, strangely enough, are struggling at the same time. So all of these things seem to be connected. But currently, I think trying to have people get back to work in a safe manner is probably the best thing that would happen.
Okay, our next question comes from Sharon.
Hello again.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
And how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you mentioned about money being spent and wasted. What will you do to make sure that Pennsylvania schools are fairly funded?
I'm assuming you mean colleges or public schools?
Public schools.
Public schools. Well, one of the issues that I see, and again, this goes back to a lot of systematic racism that happens in the United States, is the fact that our public school system is actually funded by local real estate taxes. And one of the things I would like to see is actually a more even sharing of that tax responsibility for public schools. And I know a lot of people in the Libertarian Party uh, basically like the idea of doing away with public schools. I see a certain need for public schools. I'm not sure if everybody in here understands the reason that public schools were first started, but public schools were essentially first started in order to remove younger people from the workforce. There was a time in the American history where people as young as 4 or 5 years old would actually be working in sweatshops, and the public school system was essentially started so that people would not be competing with adults who needed jobs. So what I would like to see done is a more even sharing of the responsibility for the public school system. And to the extent that your parents have some type of choice as to where you can or should not go, I believe they should also have the ability to do that too. So.
Okay, our next question comes from Ozma.
Hi.
Hi,
Um,
how
my,
are you?
hi. My question is, why is it important for young people to vote?
Why is it important for young people to vote? It's a right that you have to vote. A lot of people have done a lot of things to make sure that you have the right to vote. So in my mind, for people to understand that for years, people in this country had been deprived of the right to vote, it's very important that you exercise that right, in my mind. When I say that, I do tell people to use that right cautiously and protect that right. Um, as I will tell you, I have been involved with both major political parties before becoming a libertarian. And I used to see a lot of disinformation by both political parties. What you really need to do is spend a lot of time examining facts and don't just buy into the narrative of the two political parties. Look at whenever somebody tells you something as a politician, you need to really understand that there's some motivation for what they're saying. Once you understand the motivation, you can understand whether they're being honest with you or whether they're being objective about these things. The problem is that a lot of times people will say things because they have some other reason or rationale for trying to convince you to vote a specific way. One of the things I always find funny about the two major political parties right now is that they're both, I can't think of another word to put it, they're almost hell-bent on trying to get exclusive control of the government. And I think to myself, that's probably the worst thing we could ever have in America, for one political party or the other to control all of the avenues of government. It really keeps so many people out of participating. And one of the things I want to do is I want to see more voices come into the mix. And for instance, the presidential debates, to me, it's bizarre that only two candidates can debate. And there's a reason for that. People probably don't realize that that presidential debate commission is actually controlled by the two political parties, and it's actually a private corporation. In order to get around the First Amendment restriction on speech, where the government can't restrict speech, they actually went out and set up the Public Debate Commission as a private corporation. So essentially it couldn't be sued. And they basically excluded other political parties from those debates purposefully. And again, to me, that is not a good thing. When you see a country that is basically maneuvering to control speech, that's probably as dangerous as it could possibly get. And like I say, I would always encourage people to vote, but really you need to understand some of the stuff. And in my mind, you have to spend some time to make sure you protect that right and understand when you're exercising that right, that it has some very big ramifications.
All right, our last question for today comes from Zia.
Okay, so my last question is, as Attorney General, what will you do to protect the rights of the LGBTQ community?
I'm glad you asked this question. My campaign chairman is actually a member of that community, and the Libertarian Party has actually been on the forefront of this issue since 1971, which is when the party was formed. They were actually the only political party that was in favor of gay marriage at the time. So we have, as a party, we have done a tremendous amount in that avenue. And strangely enough, it's the other two major parties that have taken years and years and years to even get to the point where we have been at for almost 50 years. So I would probably say, to protect the rights. I mean, everybody in this country deserves equal protection. Everybody in this country, in my mind, deserves to have equal right to housing or anything like that. As I say, I have friends, I have members of my family who are minorities. I have my own campaign manager is a openly gay minister, by the way. And, that's exactly what the Libertarian Party is all about. We basically get our name Libertarian based upon civil liberties. We are a party that believes strongly in personal civil liberties, as opposed to giving that power over to the state. So your teacher, Mr. Gavin, probably can explain to you at some point about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. If we were applying that analogy from when the country first started, we would probably be in the camp of the Anti-Federalists, asserting privileges and rights for citizens as opposed to the government. So that's a big issue for the Libertarian Party, and certainly something that I would continue to maintain.
All right, Mr. Wassmer, I'd like to thank you for being here today again and answering all of these questions. I do just have a few closing remarks.
Sure.
So I'm going to share my screen to go through those. All right. So once again, everyone, November 3rd, this coming Tuesday, is Election Day. So please make sure that if you have not voted by mail already, that you make a plan to vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. If you have your mail-in ballot in your possession, it is time to fill out that mail-in ballot and drop it off at one of the satellite election offices, or bring it with you on Tuesday to your polling place. If you are interested or need to research candidates for various positions, you can go to wevote.70.org. Committee of 70 has fantastic information about all candidates for the available positions for the different races. And in order to find your polling place, simply go to votespa.com/polling place, and then you'll know where to go to vote on Tuesday. Now, if you did request a mail-in ballot and it is sitting in front of you waiting to be filled out, there are some things that you need to make sure you do in order to make sure your vote counts. Inside that mail-in ballot, inside the envelope you received, are the ballot measures. So make sure you read those and vote on those. There are a set of instructions. Please make sure you read the instructions carefully. There's the ballot itself, which you'll of course fill out. Once you are done filling out the ballot, please make sure to place it inside the secrecy envelope, and then place that inside the outer envelope. And that is what you will be turning in to vote. And then last but not least, there is a huge effort in Philadelphia to organize, especially youth voters. So you can reach out to these organizations, follow them on social media if you're interested in learning how to get more involved. So thank you again, Mr. Wassmer, for being here and answering our questions.
It's my pleasure. I'm sorry I didn't get to more of them if there were more. So.
Thank you, Mr. Wassmer. And I'll just jump in on what Mr. Gavin was discussing, that at this point, the USPS has recommended that if you have not yet turned in your mail-in ballot, that it is advisable now, just because of the slow mail delivery, it's advisable now to bring it to a satellite election office or drop box between now and Election Day. And satellite offices are open on Election Day to drop your ballot off. Do not bring your mail-in ballot to the polls on Election Day. They will not accept them. They'll direct you to a satellite office to drop those off. But otherwise, thank you very much, and good luck on November 3rd.
Thank you.